I guess I hope through my work that, I mean, I'm trying to convey the reality in terms of like people's, these things can exist all side by side, cruelty and goodness and beauty and terror, I guess. And you do see like these moments of, just people doing extraordinary things in the middle of really horrible things.
Hello, I'm Barry Malone, and welcome to Proximities, the podcast. If you don't already subscribe to our daily newsletter, you can do so at proximities.news. Now, I usually start these episodes by telling you what country we'll be talking about. Today, though, it's a little different. We'll be talking about several countries, but I guess primarily we'll be talking about love. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by one of the world's most acclaimed foreign correspondents and authors, Sally Hayden. We're going to be talking about Sally's latest book, This Is Also a Love Story, which for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm going to hold up right now. There it is. Sally, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience and maybe tell us a bit about the concept of the book?
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for that introduction. I definitely wouldn't say I'm one of the world's most acclaimed, but I appreciate the sentiment. And yeah, you do amazing work. So I'm very honored to be on. So about the book, so it's my second book. And it's my second book, but it was the first book that I had the idea to write. And it came about initially after a few years of being a kind of international reporter. And as you know from your work, just I was seeing so much cruelty and exploitation and inequality and just feeling quite jaded, even a few years in at kind of the cruelty of this planet. And at the same stage, I had noticed that every kind of crisis situation I reported on, I would always see love. And, that wasn't necessarily a very loud love, but it was visible in people's actions and, the things they did for their family members or for their spouses or sometimes even for the communities around them. And I wanted to write a book that would highlight this and make sure that, it's present in people's understandings of crisis situations that this still exists. So what the book is 9 different countries, 9 different crisis situations, but looking at it through, I call them a kind of love stories. It's not just romantic love, it's also love for family members, love for community. But yeah, hopefully it gives people more insight into what it's like to go through these experiences, but also just a reminder that there are always humans at the center of everything we read about in the news.
Yeah, I guess I was a little bit surprised, I mean, in a positive way, that there were so many different kinds of love that you touched on. It wasn't just romantic love, but there was familial love and brotherly love and love for friendship. And as you say, love for community. And there was a mother's love in this chapter written from northeastern Nigeria, which moved me so deeply, that particular chapter. Did you know immediately that you wanted to write about different kinds of love? Because I guess a lot of people would focus in on romantic love only.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the love that I witness, it's definitely not just romantic, and romantic love itself isn't always straightforward, is it?
Mm.
And I think that I didn't want to limit it. Yeah, I mean, you also run the risk, don't you, that like a couple could break up if you interview them, and then by the time the book comes out, they've broken off. I think that there's challenges with all types of love, and yeah, for me, I defined love as even love towards humanity, just people doing good things for, for even strangers in some cases. But yeah, I thought that it was important to kind of cover various different types, and I mean, there are a few chapters that are on romantic love, and they kind of like explore the complexities, even things that I hadn't thought about, of how that can be strange, when you face a crisis. But
Mm.
yeah, I thought that there are definitely different types of love that are very worth honoring as well, and that don't mean less.
Was there Was there one sort of particular thing that you saw or person that you met that first sparked the idea?
That's a good question. I actually think so. I know when I had the idea, or when I started at least talking about it a lot, which was in 2018 around February, and I had been, it's not even in the book, I just mention it very briefly, but I had been in Gambia after the fall of, or after the ousting of Jammeh, the ex
Hmm.
dictator, and I was going around rural Gambia interviewing people about what they were called witch hunts, I think basically was what they were called. So Jamie used to go around and, or like order his soldiers to go around and get people to drink this like liquid that made them hallucinate. And I was going around interviewing people who had experienced this and witnessed it. And I remember speaking, because various people died as a result, or seemingly as a result of what had happened. And I remember interviewing, you know, people who had gone to great lengths to try and rescue their, in one case, like a husband who was trying to find his wife and rescue her, and in another case, a husband whose wife had actually died. And yeah, just thinking to myself, you know, this is also, you know, both feeling incredibly sad that this kind of horrible thing had happened, and also that I was speaking to people who had never, because we actually ended up going door to door in these villages, I was speaking to people who had never talked about this before and told me outright, we wouldn't have told you what had happened if you had come here before, we would have lied about it. And they were, you know, because of fear, and they were suddenly able to actually talk about this thing. And yeah, I was thinking to myself at that time, you know, this is also a story about the love people have for each other and what they do. And it was after that, I think, that I started talking about writing this book, and yeah, and kind of thinking about stories for it. But then I got a bit distracted, because I mean, distracted is an understatement, but I began reporting on migrant detention centers in Libya. So later that year, I was contacted by refugees in a migrant detention center in Libya, and that kind of sparked years of reporting, which I think you have potentially interviewed me about, or your show interviewed me about. But this idea of a book about love, it went on the back burner for years. And then when my book about kind of crimes against humanity on Europe's borders came out in 2022, I then started thinking, why don't I go back and also finish, you know, finish what I was trying to do. And I think maybe people thought that it's strange to go from one to the other, but actually I see them as completely interlinked, because they're also both books about the dangers of dehumanization and how that can be used to, you know, to enable atrocities, and how yeah, how kind of the dangers of detachment as well. And yeah, what it's like to live through a crisis, because I also saw love in Libya, you know, people taking care of the people they loved while going through these migration routes. And that's something that I guess I've expanded on here.
Yeah, yes, you were. You were on the stream on Al Jazeera, which was the show that I produced at the time. I want to come back to the dehumanization question, but your answer there just sparked something in me, which was the difficulty as a journalist of getting people to open up sometimes about their personal lives, and you know, whether it's in a war zone or a disaster zone or a refugee camp, or you know, people are living through hunger or under a repressive dictatorship, or whatever it is. You know, something that always made me a bit uncomfortable was that I kind of flew in and I went and I met people going through the worst time of their lives, and I had 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and it felt very extractive. You know, I was going in and I was using them to go away and write this story. And we don't often get the chance to talk to people in the depth that you did. How did you go about that? Was that a challenge? Was it a different muscle you had to exercise as a journalist?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I also struggle with that feeling of being, you know, our job is inherently a kind of extractive. We obviously hope that good is going to come
Hmm.
from exposing what's happening and telling stories, but it can feel, yeah, very kind of difficult. And it's horrible to ask somebody about the worst time of their life. And I really like, you know, I don't subscribe to this thing of persuading people to talk to you. I really like, I want to talk to people who want to talk to me. Many people have reasons that they want to, that they do want to speak, but many don't. And yeah, it's important that we respect that. I think with this book, it was really interesting, actually. I was surprised that people were willing to talk to me. Like, I find it awkward even talking about emotions and, my personal life and all of that. Like, I think many of us do, and particularly like talking about something like love, it's not something that we always even have the words for. So I think that, it did surprise me, to be honest, that so many people were open and willing to speak about it. And I think that one of the reasons was that they wanted to share experience, which again says something about human connection, and all of our desires for connections. A lot of the people I talked to, be it like the women in Ukraine who had partners on the front lines, or people in Japan who were mourning, people that they had lost in the tsunami and earthquake like more than a decade ago. They were like, we've been through something really terrible, or we're going through something really terrible, and we've actually learned lessons from it, and we want to share those lessons. We think that that could be valuable for people, either in the future, or maybe not the exact same situation, but a similar situation, or, even there's something to learn from it, that could be, that could be useful for other people. And I think that that was a generosity that I hugely admire. And it was interesting explaining to people what I was trying to do, because there would be a moment where they're like, why are you writing this book? Like, why are you interested in this? For example, in Ukraine, I had it, the women that I spoke to, they, I explained to them, and so they'd talk to me, but then their partners, I ended up meeting two of them, and the men would be like, sorry, why are you here? Like, what are you doing? And so I'd explain to them, and they'd be like, actually, that's really important. I'm Sergey, who's the husband of Irina, for example. He was like, actually, I think this is really important, because he wanted to talk about mental health and the impact that the kind of trauma that they were experiencing could have on their relationships, and how he feels that that's something that's important to raise. And there were women there who were talking about, like Ludmilla, who's mentioned in it. She wanted to talk about like traditional, basically how relationships, she felt, are being kind of forced more into traditional gender norms than they were before, and how that could have ramifications in the future. And so she wanted to raise that, and there was various other people who wanted to talk about different things which they feel are important to know. And unless you've kind of been through this kind of crisis, maybe you wouldn't have thought about that. So I think that people were quite open. I mean, obviously it's, I'm talking to the people who wanted to talk to me, so not everybody would have agreed to be part of it, but I'm really grateful to all the people who were. And I think there was another thing as well, which was, they wanted, often I think people who've gone through a crisis, they feel almost like there's been like a flattening of their experience, or like a kind of reduction in who they are as people. And I see this even in Lebanon, where I live at the moment. Like, people will say, suddenly there's this perception of us that we're only one thing, only a victim, or only this or only that. And maybe that humor gets lost, or love gets lost, or all the other things that make up a human life. Suddenly it's like they've been stripped from them, and that can be another type of pain. It's obviously not the same as, losing your life or getting injured or whatever, but it's still like it does still feel quite painful for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think it's a question partly of humanization, isn't it? And I think we've seen it a lot over the years, but even in the last couple of years, we've certainly seen it in coverage of Gaza. We've seen it in the recent coverage of Lebanon, as you say, and we've seen it in coverage of Iran. And on that sort of humanization question, when I was first looking into your book, I went to your publisher's website, and there was, I guess, was kind of a blurb there about the book. And there were a couple of lines in that blurb that really struck me, and I guess made me think, God, this is such a great idea. And that line was, in stories that crisscross the globe, From Uganda to Lebanon, Rwanda to Iraq, Hayden asks us, what if news was recounted through the actions people take for those they love? Would it become harder to dehumanize those who seem different to us? Was that born out of, I guess, a sort of a frustration or a weakness or a gap that you saw in international reporting? And the book was, I guess, sort of an effort to write that in some way?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, so like I said, this book was 8 years from the idea to the publishing, and probably my thoughts developed over that period of time. But that quote that you just read is actually kind of a continuation of something I said in my first book, which, at least I think it was in the final version, which is about migration routes. And I was saying, you know, when you hear people talk about migration in countries like UK or Ireland, you know, often it's in the sense of like a threat or a swarm or you know, all of these terms that we hear, and I had asked what, like, I see so much courage in the people taking the journeys, and I see love and agency and, you know, people making impossible choices, and you know, all of these, you know, when you listen to the story of an individual, it can be so you know, so moving. And I think in the first book I asked, like, what if this was being looked at through the stories of heroism and bravery and optimism, even the optimism for a better life. And I think that, yeah, in the new book it is kind of a continuation of that idea. What if more news was told through the prism of love, because love is a like quite major motivator. And I think that also gets lost. Like, why do people do the things they do? It's often related to who you love and who you want to take care of. And yeah, I think that, and also just, yeah, good, the existence of goodness, the existence of kindness, that can get quite lost. And I understand why it does, because I think that we as journalists, we have a duty to report on wrongdoing, you know, and speak truth to power and all of this. So, you know, if something terrible is happening and something good is happening, probably I'll report on the terrible thing most likely. But so that's, I don't want to say a failure, but it's kind of a inherent to the nature of what news reporting is. But I do think things get lost in that. And yeah, I think that it's up to us as well to challenge ourselves and to, you know, to question that, and for a reader to be aware, or a, you know, news watcher to be aware that the full picture isn't coming through necessarily to them.
And there are some brilliant journalists out there, you know, yourself included, and some great foreign correspondents who I think try really hard, but often they're hampered by the formats that are available, or the space that's available, or the particular interests of the news organization, or sometimes just getting the audience even to engage with those stories can be a bit of a challenge, you know. I had sort of incidents myself over the years where I was a correspondent also for Reuters in sort of African countries and Middle Eastern countries a good while before you, Sally, because I'm a bit older. But I remember having sort of similar experiences myself where I just noticed life and resilience, because I think that's another thing that comes through super strongly in your book, is just this picture of lives still being lived. You know, I remember one time I went to a refugee camp on the Ethiopia-Eritrea border, and you know, there were these young men who'd been effectively trapped in this camp for years and years and years, and they'd fled there because of forced conscription or because of religious persecution, but they'd built lives in the camp as well. You know, they had bars where they showed football, and they had great cafes, and you know, I was led through this like weird warren of tunnels and came out in some sort of secret room under a building where people were chewing cats, which for those who don't know is a kind of a stimulant leaf. And you know, then this other one that I always recall is I went to the site of a car bombing in Baghdad, and people had been killed and there was blood on the ground and people were sweeping up and they were shocked. But then I saw a man who started to feed birds outside the cafe. And it was just this realization that, you know, these people are still living in the same world that we're living in, and they're still trying to live Was that something that you noticed, that resilience, that desire to live a life?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the word resilience, as you definitely know as well, it's not controversial exactly, but like some people really kind of bristle at it because they're like, well, why should we be forced to live in this situation? You know, it's a feeling like it can almost remove the responsibility or the need for accountability and justice and all of that. But yeah, of course it does exist. And I think that, I mean, I see that in Lebanon now all the time, like food left out for cats because there's so many stray animals because of the number of displaced people particularly. And yeah, you'll be like going through an area that is almost completely empty, and you know there's airstrike sites all around, and you'll see like different food left out for animals. Yeah, I think that it is something that that you need to, or that you want to show. I think something else that gets lost as well, it sounds strange, but like because I've been living in Lebanon since January 2024 and reporting there over the last few years of war. And after April 8th, I'm sure people know about the kind of mass Israeli attacks that killed hundreds of people, and that was a really horrific day, and the next few days were very horrific. And I went to a lot of the airstrike sites, and then I was interviewing a hospital director about what had happened. And I said to him, I always try and say what do you think is not being covered more broadly, so we had done our interview and we had talked about that day, and it was horrible. And I said, what do you think is not being covered? And he was like, people like don't know how funny Lebanese people are. And I was like, what? Like, I didn't expect this at all. And he was like, I don't know. He just had this feeling like there's all this terrible tragedy, and of course that should be reported, but it's something about the humanity, like the humanity of the people in the middle of that's somehow like getting lost. And of course I'm not going to do a story about how funny Lebanese people are in that moment, but yeah, I think it kind of speaks to a broader experience of what it's like to be the person reported on in those situations. And I think that, all good journalists have a duty to be questioning ourselves all the time, don't we? Like, as to whether we're doing that the right way, and whether we're reflecting the reality. And it's tricky. And yeah, I think that people do like get by, but of course it's because they have to, Mm-hmm. It's not that like, I hate this thing of like, people there are used to this, I think I find that very frustrating. Like, the last few years I've heard people say, oh, but people in Lebanon are used to war. And I'm like, nobody's used to war. Like, war is not something that you can maybe get more used to having to survive in that environment, but like, it's never not painful, and it's never not traumatizing. And, it's not that some people are just, it doesn't matter to them. But yeah, I think that, I guess I hope through my work that, I'm trying to convey the reality in terms of like people's, these things can exist all side by side, cruelty and goodness and beauty and terror, I guess. And you do see like these moments of, just people doing extraordinary things in the middle of really horrible things.
Sally, where can people sort of follow you and find your work?
Good question. Well, I'm using Instagram more now, so they can follow me on Instagram, Sally Hayden, or SallyHayd. I've got a Blue Sky now, and I'm pretty Googleable if anyone wants to contact me. I don't know if they do, but the books are available, I think, in general bookshops.
Sally Hayden, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
If you stayed with us until the end of that conversation, thank you very much. Just a reminder that you can subscribe to the newsletter at proximities.news. Today's episode was produced by David Tarbox. We'll be back next week with another one, and I really hope you can join us.